Welcome to another episode of Mindful City, Tuning into Life, a podcast to discover and celebrate the many ways that our city is using mindfulness in our practical daily lives. Welcome to another episode of Mindful City. Today I have in person, which is very unique in these days, to have an in-person podcast. I have in person with me Penn Johnson, and I am so delighted to have Penn here because Penn was, actually I've heard of you through several of my friends, and we did the Gaia Revolution retreat, and I know Jen was there. And we just completed a retreat called The Nature of Your Nature. And we had a virtual concert with Penn. And we did that the evening. It was a Friday evening. And one of my close friends sent me a message after. And she said she never had an experience from music like that before. And I remember mentioning, I said to them, it's medicine music. It's healing music. And she said, I just couldn't understand what that meant until I had that experience. And so, the music, Penn's music is really uplifting and it really moves you. And when I heard that you were in town, I had to take that opportunity to meet you in person. And so I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you reaching out. And I think the other thing was that I believe that performance for the retreat was on the new moon in Scorpio.
Yes.
Which is a sign that dominates 5 of my planets.
Oh my goodness.
So that was, someone told me that after the fact, and I was like, oh wow, that's crazy. So
it was such a beautiful experience. And to be there with you. And so I'm really, I've accepted the fact that I'm very bad at doing bios and introductions. And so I asked you if you would share a little bit about yourself and how you came to making this incredible music.
It's really hard. I was telling you, I sort of struggle with time. I'll try to sum it up if I can. I went to school to study creative writing. And my sophomore year, I took a intro to environmental studies class, and I learned about hydraulic fracturing for natural gas. And we had Josh Fox come to the classroom. He's like an infamous documentary filmmaker, a musician, an activist. And he was talking about all these things that were happening. And then I was like, that day or like either that day or like the next week, I went and changed to a joint major in environmental studies and creative writing so I could write about this, about the environmental impact and all that stuff, and sort of took a bunch of classes my sophomore, junior, and senior year that packaged all that together and coupled my love of writing with my activism. And, my junior year, I studied abroad in Australia, and I was out there for environmental action and sustainability. So I learned a lot about composting, permaculture, also, hitchhiking and just meeting people, in a totally new part of the world. And that experience, just either meeting someone who knew someone I knew in the States, or just feeling so at home, with my homestay family, and just a totally different way of living that I wasn't familiar with. And I came back this totally different person. I wrote a book about my time there. It's called Trail Mixing Goon. Some people have compared it to like a Kerouac-esque on the road sort of journey. It's a journal of every day I was there. So it's like from the day I left to the day my last day on the plane back. And I came back just totally different, was really focused on the activism side of things. And my senior year, I did like a fast for the climate, based on what was going on with the climate talks in Paris. There was a leader in the Philippines who said he was going to fast until climate change. There was a meaningful solution to climate change. Oh, nice. So I was like, yeah, I'll do that too. A bunch of people were doing it. I was the only one in my school, but I tried to get more people to join me. People like would come and like sit for a meal and not eat and stuff. But it was really just like extreme activism stuff. I got arrested on the White House fence, protesting the Keystone XL pipeline.
Yes.
And worked with, became the president of the environmental group at my school and did some stuff there and gave some talks and, was performing at open mics and playing songs and, sort of bringing all that together. I graduated. I didn't know what I was going to do. Mm-hmm. So my friend messaged me and was like, hey, there's this opportunity in Northeast Pennsylvania working with people who are impacted by fracking. So I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. She's like, there's no money necessarily, and there's just a place to live and food. And I was like, well, it beats being at my parents' house. So like that day or the next day, I just packed up some stuff and, left for Pennsylvania. And I got there and just the people I met were so hospitable and gracious, that we were there to help in any way, because they had been suffering through this for years. And it was just, when you see a drilling rig, from pretty up, as close as you can get legally, without getting in trouble from the companies involved, it's a totally different world. You're just like, wow, this is what quote unquote energy independence looks like. We're like drilling into the earth and like taking all of these fossil fuels from millions of years ago, and throwing this waste all over the roads and all this stuff that you would think is almost like conspiracy theory stuff, and it's just hearing it from the people who are working on these rigs and managing them. You're dropping C4 down holes to bust fissures in the earth, literal C4, blocks they're dropping in and just detonating them. So it's like there are very lax regulations and all that stuff sort of just built into this incredible passion for telling the story of what was going on here. Yeah. And I used my knowledge of writing, and I had taken a beginner guitar class my senior year of high school and, sort of played a little bit in college, like I mentioned, and really started honing into that. I was hanging out with a songwriter there, a woman who I grew close to, and she really taught me a lot about writing songs and telling stories and just living this super alternative lifestyle.
Was it anything you had thought of when you were planning your life?
No, I knew from, well, it's funny, my mom sent me something on my 29th birthday, which was a few weeks ago, that I guess like my second birthday, I got this like toy guitar and like played it all day and like made up songs. So even like at 2 years
so you
old,
already knew you would be doing something.
My senior year of high school, I started writing a novel, and I took this creative English class, and I was inspired by, I have a tattoo of Catcher in the Rye. I was inspired by this book to basically apply to college as like without my SATs. I just submitted like a 28-page continuation to Catcher in the Rye. So like years later in Holden's life, after he gets married and breaks up with it, and all this crazy stuff goes down. It was like not that great, but it was good enough to get me into college. And I had a really, I don't know what the word would be, unconventional interview. And I like did a bunch of like impressions and impersonations of people and just like came at it with like this totally me energy that, was totally different than anything they'd seen. And I got this like handwritten pen note, like not one of those like, we cordially invite you to, like, your interview was interesting. We want you to come to our school because we think whatever, and interestingly, I never really felt like I fit in at my school. And I almost didn't get into the study abroad program. In fact, I didn't get in, and they had someone cancel like last minute. And I remember I jumped up so hard, I punched a hole in my ceiling. I was like sitting at my computer. I was like, yes! And like punched this hole in my ceiling in my apartment. And, but yeah, so flash forward, I'm in Northeast Pennsylvania in Montrose, working with these people and telling the story, and, they're hearing these songs and being inspired, and I'm going to rallies and protests in DC, and, we're doing all this canvassing for this pipeline, trying to figure out, tell people what's going on, and just like watching the manipulation tactics of big companies, corporate industry is just insane. It's almost like you go into these open houses for pipelines and they have these cue cards. And if you say the right trigger word, you're going to get that cue card response. Yeah. Almost like clockwork.
Yeah, it's already
they're like embedded into this series of trigger words and all this stuff. And it's just really disillusioning, So I took that and I was writing this like activism protest music. And somewhere along the line, I was just like, this is working to a degree, but it's not quite where I'm trying to go. Just
what I was going to ask you, because in that environment, it can just bring so much frustration and like loss of hope. And that can turn into anger, and
every day.
I was curious, how did you transform your music, from that? Because you wanted to help it, but like my song would be all about the manipulation.
Right.
But you found a way for the music to be healing. What was that transition like for you?
I mean, that's really a testament to my own process, because like when I was in Pennsylvania, I was drinking a lot, I was smoking cigarettes, I was living a pretty unhealthy lifestyle, and traveling around a lot and just doing ridiculous stuff. And as I went on throughout my journey of, because now it's 2015 I met my then ex-girlfriend in 2016 and like lived at her parents' house and was like writing this music, but still sort of trying to figure out what I was doing. Like I didn't really feel like I belonged there. It was totally weird situation. And I was like playing gigs at schools, but also like doing, a bunch of drinking a lot and doing a bunch of like, not a bunch, but like a decent amount of like hard drugs and stuff like that. And just playing from a very ego-based and like almost very ungrounded and uncentered place. And then when we broke up, I was like, I'm going to Austin, Texas. So I drove across the country to Austin and, still had some of those tendencies, but little by little sort of weeded out, over a series of years. I was in Austin for 9 months, sleeping on couches and meeting people and jamming around campfires and just like, going to festivals and volunteering on trash duty and playing music and just, sharing and just like constantly on the move. Again, delving really far into like psychedelics and stuff like that. And that's lent itself to a lot of the songs that I play. And there's a lot of imagery of psychedelic experiences and plant medicine experiences in there. And so that sort of, just through all that, just like cleaning out myself. And, I've been a vegan for 7.5, 8 years. And I was like taking pretty good care of like the food I was putting into my body, but there was still a lot of like overuse of psychedelics and like, a decent amount of drinking. And eventually I just sort of weaned myself off that and stopped drinking, stopped smoking, stopped just doing pretty much everything, and just sort of came at it from a more grounded perspective. So
it's kind of interesting because when we're doing music, my extent of music knowledge is that, I used to sing and that was it. I was in a choir and then I worked in a radio station for quite a bit as a teenager. And so I had a lot of exposure to artists and music. And one of the things is you're the first listener of your own music. And as you were sharing your journey of what you were doing, I was thinking it's interesting because that creation of the music was healing you first.
Absolutely.
That's it. And it's like you're healing yourself and then you're sharing that healing journey also with others. And so we hear it and we're also kind of going through your experience. So that music is that grounding, for you that you had. But it's interesting because, and I wonder how you're managing that, because being an artist like you are, also traveling and being, that in itself is not very grounding, because it's,
Yeah.
you're already up and living a lifestyle, that isn't common for many of us, working a job where you're getting a regular paycheck and things of that nature. So it has this added layer of stresses.
Absolutely.
How do you manage, because obviously it's love for music that keeps you going, your passion, but how do you navigate the uncertainty that comes with the lifestyle?
I feel like that's a really common question, and I wish I had an answer. People often tell me that I deal really well with what I'm doing, and I'm like, yeah, but there are times, I've been listening to a lot of like Ram Dass and listening to his stories and sort of just understanding that like you can come from a really grounded spot and still lose your shit every once in a while.
Right, exactly.
Even pretty frequently, because it's like you do get into that headspace of like, and especially when something happens in your life or your relationship or a friendship or something like that, or a gig falls through, you're like, how am I going to make the, make the rent or make the money? Or I don't have rent because I live in my van, but how am I going to make the money for food, or what am I going to do here? So I don't know. I sort of just have really gotten good at living on the fly, and it's something that a lot of people admire, but they don't understand the psychological, emotional, physical, consequences of that. Because and I guess I sort of brought myself into that like uncomfortability when I was abroad, because I would walk 5, 6, 7 miles out from town and hitchhike, to wherever I would get dropped off. And then I would just be there, I wouldn't have, my phone would be dead. There's no service anywhere, and no one I was associated with had a phone. So we were all just sort of like, connected on a higher sort of basis.
Yeah, you have to.
Like that was the one thing about being in a street. Like my phone was always dead. I was never doing like the few times I was like posting pictures. I wasn't like writing captions or anything like that. I was just like, cool stuff, Australia, and I got really used to just like being out there and just being in a foreign country, no wallet, not a whole lot going on, just a bag over my shoulder, and I would end up wherever I would go, and people would have stuff or they wouldn't, and I don't know, I just sort of like, I don't know. I just acclimated well to it, I think, because there's this point where you're like, oh my God, I'm out here and all this stuff. And you're like, yeah, but like, whatever, it's like, what's the alternative?
Right,
like if I have to sleep on this roadside, I'm going to do it, because there's no, you can complain as much as you want or worry or like place blame or be like, why isn't anyone picking me up, or like blah, 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 and all this stuff. And I don't know, more often than not, someone just come around the corner. They'd be like, where are you going? Oh, that's where I'm going. I'm headed there right now, and it's just like off to the next place.
Do you feel that that lifestyle and your circumstances and the way that you deal with that, is that also your process in creating music? Is it kind of like a freestyle way of creating music, or do you have set ideas? Do you write poetry? Like, tell me a little bit about your process.
Right. Yeah. It's difficult because I have like running lists of lyrics and stuff like that, and things people say that I write down, and I have like endless journals and like notes on everything. But for the most part, I mean, recently, especially after all of like the drinking and like all that heavy stuff that I've sort of just done away with and really just cleared up a lot. If I'm inspired, I'm just going to sit down and write a song. It's just going to come out, and I'm going to be like, I might need to edit it a little bit, like change different words and try to get some,
like maybe make it flow a little bit differently, or
like
something
I like when phrases have, like if you have a phrase that has a bunch of words with M, it's like M after M after M after M. I forget what it's called. Alliteration.
Okay.
So I like alliterative I'm an English major, so I can make up words like that. I think that, I don't know if that's a word, alliterative like phrases or phrasings or ways to say things. And I really like imagery, and I like being able to sort of paint this picture. And oftentimes it's kind of like a psychedelic, off kilter, inspired by either some meditative thought I've been going through or a situation in my life, and yeah, I mean, a lot of the times it just comes right out. A lot of these songs, like the one that you want me to play, this Hey I Hey song, came out after this crazy experience I had in San Antonio, Texas, with some friends of mine that I was traveling with at the time. But I just sat down and just like the song just popped out, and a lot of the stuff I've been writing really recently is just like I sit down and just like hammer it out, or it just comes. So you kind of
absorb your experiences, and then it comes out in that creative process as a song.
And a lot of it's more. I see myself as more of a poet. Townes Van Zant's a big inspiration for me. He's like a sort of infamous Texas country folk guy, and the way in which he's like the songwriter's songwriter. Steve Earle once said, like, Townes Van Zant's the best songwriter in the world, and I would dance on Bob Dylan's coffee table and say that to him, So I get, and he sort of preferred to be referred to as a poet more than a songwriter, because a lot of the songs that I write are just poetry set to music. So some of it might not have like a specific chorus or verse. It's just like thought after thought after thought after thought. And then it just sort of like closes up itself. Yeah. And I've got several songs like that, but I've also got some very chorus based stuff. So it varies.
Do you, how have you managed, now we're dealing with a whole other level of circumstances in our lives with the pandemic, and knowing that you are an artist, that that music and getting that kind of like that reverb of people hearing your music and the vibrations that are created by people being together, by singing and hearing music and watching their healing process and your own. How have you managed with this transition of things not being able to gather?
Well, it was really hard at first, but there's just elements of certain things that like lined up. For example, this summer, my partner and I had a bunch of shows that we were going to do. Folk and Fire, we do a performance where she fire performs, fire dances, and I play the music, and she sort of has these dances that she choreographs or improvises based on the songs that I play. And we were going to do a bunch of those, but then all that fell through. But with the unemployment money, we pretty much just used that to travel. And, we would meet people along the way and see old friends of mine. And we're pretty like safe and good about the practices. And, we would be at a lot of farmers markets and just out in nature away from people a lot of the time. So that was, last summer was really based around like this idea of a tour. And this summer was more of just traveling. Yeah. We didn't have like a set schedule. I tried to keep a schedule. She said she wanted to visit a whole bunch of nature places. So I was like, cool. So I went through and spent hours just finding places and using an app called All Trails. If anyone's out there wants to know how you can find hikes and stuff around you, All Trails is like a really cool app where you can find trails and trailheads and mountains and hikes and all that stuff all over the country and possibly all over the world. And we would just show up we would just be like, yeah, cool, drive. And we would keep the drives pretty short. Yeah. And often we would just meet people, like we summited Mount Washington sort of accidentally and met this guy on the way coming up. He didn't have a shirt on. And I was like, I'm going to ask this guy what's up. And his name's Derek, if he ever listens to this. And I talked with him for probably like an hour, just standing there, while he was getting ready to go up to the summit. We were going back down, and he said, yeah, you guys are in the van, right? Yeah, I'll come over after I'm done and hang out. And I just played songs for him, and he met a guy at the summit, and they hiked back down together, and we were all just hanging out and playing songs and sharing stories and stuff like that. And that's
finding
sort of
ways to connect.
That's what it's
during
about,
this time.
you know.
Yeah.
And streaming's been really cool. I've been streaming on Reddit.com, and I'm actually sort of talking with my younger brother, who's really, he just quit his job. He's transitioning, and he's trying to help me sort of figure out this Twitch program that's like usually for gamers, but a lot of musicians are utilizing it now, and just trying to get a streaming schedule in place so I can have scheduled times when I go on and perform and stuff like that. So, and, you know, get donations from people, and because that's a big part of it. And
I like you had shared with me, before we started the podcast, because I know that you have a site where you're basically, the support is there so that you can provide music for free for others. Can you tell me a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so I try not to say the word a whole lot. It's called Patreon, and like there's a lot of people doing a whole bunch of different stuff on there. There are people doing, you know, cosplay stuff and all sorts of ridiculous, like anything you can imagine. You can create a Patreon and give people like exclusive access to things. And my favorite part about Patreon is that it's a way for people who believe in my message, or the message, it's not my message, just the message that I'm spreading and the life that I live, to bring that to other people, you know, through supporting, and say there's an organization or a nonprofit that doesn't have a big budget. And eventually I want to get to the point where I can just reach out to these people and be like, hey, do you want a free concert? It's covered. Don't worry about it. I'm going to come, you know, do all this stuff, just get the people to show up, and I'll just come perform for free, you know. And the cool thing is that you get a whole bunch of stuff based on what you want to give. So if you give, it's like, there's different tiers. So there's this Chug-a-Chug, which is the name of my van out there, that's experiencing issues again, but we're chugging through it. And that's like $5 a month. And you can get, you know, you get a signed CD of your choice. You get access to a whole bunch of unlisted YouTube videos. That's like behind the scenes stuff, and just like adventure travels in the van, and songs I haven't released and stuff like that. And I'm building up that whole thing, and I make these stickers that are like these monster stickers that are really interesting and weird. That's one of the things that came out of this pandemic, is I got an iPad and I started drawing these little doodles, and people were like, hey man, you should make stickers.
That's awesome.
And I was like, all right, I don't think it's great, but whatever. So people have been liking that. But the one that I've really pushed people to is this Life of Penn. And not only does that include a whole bunch of those videos and stickers, and you get all of my CDs, physical copies of all of my CDs, like past and everything I release into the future. But it also has things like phone memos, you know, so like things I record on my phone,
that's really
home
cool.
studio recordings, stuff I record that I don't release.
So they're basically like going on a journey with you.
Right.
And what was the site?
It's called Patreon.
Okay.
But it's on my website. You can just go to pennjohnson.net/barbaloots.
Okay.
And that's going to lay it all out for you.
Okay.
But in addition to that, it's really the only place you can get like my poetry and my writings. I've written a couple novels. I wrote this book about my time in Australia. That's on there. You know, you get all of pretty much everything I create. So if you really want to dive into
the process,
and it's thousands of pages. I mean, I've got poems, short stories series, and poem series, and the interesting thing is that it's not just this medicine stuff. It's stuff from when I was like too drunk to even function, and like it brings a very human element,
right? Because you can see your whole journey.
Oh, the whole It's really crazy, because there's stuff from like when I was like doing activism work and in college, and you know, and like all of the things I was going through with. So you can see my whole journey in terms of like women and relationships, and you know, and then sort of get to this later stuff, and then see how it sort of progressed, like a timeline.
Really interesting, because you don't get that normally with artists. You don't have that insight into their life and insight into their journey and how they, you know, get to create the music that we get to enjoy.
Right.
But to know where it's coming from, what's inspiring the music. I think that's incredible information. So thank you for putting that out there and sharing that with us. I was wondering if you would like to play a song for us to end our talk today.
So it's interesting because a lot of people will be like, well, what music do you play? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, let me just play you a song, mm-hmm. Because it's so much easier to me like, I play this, whatever. It's so much better and like that has come back in so many cool ways. I was in Taos, New Mexico last year, and this guy, we were in the parking lot of this park, and this guy was like, you play a guitar? What kind of music do you play? And I played him a song. Yeah. And he invited me to this thing that he was doing with this energy worker. And I was like, this is awesome. Does he want someone to open the space for him? Oh. So I just went a couple days later and like, opened up the space for this energy worker, played 4 or 5 songs, and people were like really like, whoa, like what just happened? So it just lends itself well to, rather than just being like, here's a card, mm-hmm, like here's a whatever. And sometimes you do have to be like, here's a CD or,
but it's like an experience. Like, it's rather than explaining or like, let me experience that music. Yeah.
And that's the weird thing about this time is that through streaming, you're not getting that full experience, but there have been people like I've saved some of these comments because I save a lot of the things people say. There was this one person who struggled with eating. They got anxiety after they ate, and my music helped calm them down to digest, or like I had someone who lost a friend and I played them a song and they like totally felt at peace with it. So it's all over the world. You have people, and people can comment, where they're tuning in from and what they're going through and what they're doing. And you get a lot of like comments that are off base, but you get a lot of stuff that's, really potent, and you can tell that
you're reaching people that you didn't have access to now, through the internet. So it has its both sides of the coin, for that. But then some people are having access to things that they wouldn't have had access to. So I appreciate that work that you're doing. And I also appreciate you coming on to the podcast that you have to actually to drive and meet. And it's such a good feeling to do an in-person podcast with you today. And I would love to set this up so we can hear.
So this is the song I mentioned earlier. It's called Hey Ya Hey. Sort of an older song, but it was recorded on a thing I released called the Tampa Sessions 2, which is there's this guy Joe Giannotti in Tampa, and he records people who are passing through or locals, just for free, and throws it up. And he has a monetization thing on Facebook, so he can make a little bit and keep doing what he's doing. But he's helped me release 2 EPs, essentially for free, and I shout him out every chance I get. So this song is on there, though. It's on, wherever you listen to music, wherever you get your music fix, it's you can probably find it there. I feel a shift in the wind, knowing nowhere to begin. Foot soldiers closing in on a spiritual revolution. Hey, hey, I hear you call out to me through your mountains, your rivers, your trees. Ocean of breath, make your way. Don't obey and don't you behave. taste the salt of the earth, balance their pain, their anger, their hurt. And I know their power, their worth. We all have a purpose, and we've known it since birth. I said, I know that I am not wrong. I know that I am not wrong. Time has passed, and it's been much too long since all creation gathered and sang the same song we sing. Hey, hey, awakened warriors walking with mindfulness, sun-touched and wide open eyes, ceremony for the seas in the skies. Hey, 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 we sing. I smell the smoke in the air, so enemies and demons beware. We're building bridges to lead the people down the path of righteousness, and it starts with you and me. I said, I know that I am not wrong. I know that I am not wrong. Time has passed, and it's been much too long since all creation gathered and sang the same song we sing. Hey, 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 So I didn't know this at the time that I wrote this song, but it is a Native American chant for releasing. It just came into my head this night in San Antonio, and I looked it up, and that's what it meant. And I usually play it like at the end of like yoga classes during Shavasana, and sort of follow it with a prayer that, you know, we go through a lot. And there's a lot of different levels to what we go through, and I feel like music is sort of my response to a lot of people's pain and anger and upset and just misunderstanding and lost sense of self and all that stuff. And I hope this song helps them sort of release and let go and just be okay and sit with that. And so that's why I sing. They're sort of little prayers to myself. I hope they echo out to others. So we sing in prayer. Hey, hey. Time has passed, and it's been much too long since all creation gathered and sang the same song.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
I couldn't help but sing with you because I've been singing this song in the
I
car.
love it. Yeah,
and I was like, okay, well, the chorus is we all gather together and sing. So I was like, I gotta let that out too. So it's funny that you mentioned the purpose of that release.
And that's like my favorite part about the music, is that when other people sing along, that just feels so good, because you're just echoing that prayer even further out into, wherever, and the more people that sing, the more people it gets stuck in their head, and then they're sort of saying that prayer to themselves, and then it can echo into, all sorts of time and space. So I was grateful when you started singing. I was like, she's singing? Yeah.
Thank you for allowing me to join with you in song.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to join with me in person today. And I hope that we have many more times that we'll get to connect with each other and share with the community. And so I really wish you well on your travel journey.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be connecting. I'll be putting the information in the website,
nice.
In the message, and so everybody can join. So I'm wishing you all healing music and medicine music to your ears, and may that bring you just a lightness. I think that's all what we would like right now, is a little bit of lightness during this time, and you brought that to us. So thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the message. Namaste.
To find out more about Penn and his medicinal music journey, visit him at pennjohnson.net or find him on Instagram at pennjohnson.